Hi, Misha here, and decided to kind of revisit and update a video I did very early on here on my personal channel. A look at the Battle of Wolf 359 from Star Trek The Next Generation, Best of Both Worlds, Part 1 and 2. And this seemed a good time to do it because we're getting towards the end of the Eaglemoss collection, and it seems like now we have all the ships, or at least all the ones we'll get from this rather famous fleet, and frankly, they've done a good job because we pretty much have them all. So with that said, let's illuminate the situation. Alright, I've got the Federation ships lined out, along with the Borg Cube. This is the subscriber's gift XL Cube. And we have, I think I counted, 15 models? A few of them are stand-ins, but we pretty well have the fleet. And if you really think about it, the Battle of Wolf 359 was the first major engagement we saw on screen for Star Trek. When you go back to the original series, it's one-on-one, or at most 3 or 4 combatants. In the movies, it's the same thing. And also, we were given a lot of new classes all at once because of the Battle of Wolf 359. Of course, they're mostly kit bashes, but it's the thought that counts, since this was long before the days of CGI for television. So, kind of a brief rundown of the battle before you get into individual ships, models, talk about that. And what I want to do too is multiple videos looking at the progression of combat in Star Trek, because at this point it's a very traditional naval ship style. You know, large ships of the line, mostly static, duking it out, taking several hits. But as the series develop, especially with Deep Space Nine, combat changes. And by that I mean these 40 ships that were in Wolf 359 seemed like a huge gathering of starships to us fans back then. But then you get to Deep Space Nine, some of the final battles in Season 6 and 7 literally have thousands of ships on each side. But also the ships are getting smaller. Anyway, I'll talk more about that on that video. For now, these are all quite large ships. The smallest one would be a little over 300 meters, with the largest being over 640. The smallest crew, well, with the exception of, well, I should have said the O-berth, it's 150 meters. But if we exclude the O-berth, which I'll get to in just a second, yeah, the next smallest crew would be about 300, with the largest crew being on the Galaxy at 1,000, assuming the saucer wasn't separated. We know that of the 40 ships sitting against the Borg Cube, 39 were destroyed or wrecked, and we know that 11,000 people were killed, or even worse, perhaps assimilated. This was a crushing defeat for the Federation and really shook them out of self-delusion, complacency, and really led to a lot of changes. This isn't going to be too much on the individual ships, except as they pertain to the battle. As you know, the Borg were first encountered in the year 2364 along the neutral zone. And then in 2365, the Enterprise would encounter the Cube in System J25 in the Beta Quadrant. And then about a year and a few months later, it would be heading for Earth. The fleet will be led by Admiral J.P. Hansen, which, now that I think about it, 7 and 9's name was Annika Hansen. They should have just made that her backstory. She was on the ship with her dad. Kind of funny. And so the Enterprise is charged with stalling the Borg Cube, which it successfully does. And once it burns out its deflector, the Cube captures Picard. It heads and intercepts the battle and annihilates the fleet at the system Wolf 359, approximately 8 light years from Earth. So, ships we had. We did have one Oberth we know of, the USS Braun still. Hard to say why a science ship would be there. It could have just been in the area. And they might have also been using it for its sensors, or maybe it had some kind of Borg tech, because we know that Shelby and others were working on Borg tech. Either way, it was there, it was sent in. And I'm sure was just oh so effective against a Borg Cube. It's a relatively small ship at 150 meters. Had a crew of about 80. It did have good sensors, but it had pretty weak shields and even weaker weapons. It may not have even had photon torpedoes. It may have just had phasers. This, of course, is the USS Grissom model, which even in the original episode would have just been the same. But it was there. At least one. It's also been suggested that this might have been accidentally caught up in the battle, because we know from a Voyager episode that at least one ship was kind of drawn in by very unfortunate circumstances. Here we have the model of the USS Excelsior, representing the... I had the wrong one here, sorry guys. Excelsior class. Remember, blind. This was very much the backbone of Starfleet. It was first commissioned in the 2380s, and they were still building them well into the 24th century. We know at least 2 of them were at the battle, the USS Roosevelt and the USS Melbourne. We see the Melbourne destroyed in the Deep Space Nine pilot episode, Emissary, and it was one of the first ships to be outright destroyed. For its time, this was considered a heavy cruiser or even super starship. It was quite large for its time, at about 470 meters. Had a crew of around 700, give or take. There's several variations. And it was very powerful in its shields and weapons. But that was in the late 23rd century. But even by the 24th century, it was a strong ship. It was kind of a legacy ship too. A lot of diplomats and admirals like to have these just because of what they represented. Kind of the golden age and the backbone of Starfleet. And absolutely no contest for the Borg. Now, of course, the Constitution class. This, of course, is the Enterprise model. We don't know which one was in the battle, but we do see a destroyed star drive and presumably a destroyed saucer section as well. In reality, of course, they were using the debris left over from Star Trek III. But in universe, some people wonder why a Constitution would be deployed, being such an old design. But really, knowing Starfleet, it's not so crazy. It was probably maybe a planetary defense ship or a ship that was being used for other purposes. It was pressed in. Maybe it was brought on to be more of a hospital ship or communication ship. Maybe this was a ship that accidentally stumbled into the battle. But it would be more dated than the Excelsior, so if that didn't stand the chance, this wouldn't. The refit here is just over 300 meters, with a crew of around 400. Just going to show you. Moving along, I've kind of loosely put these in newer order. Next we had the Ambassador class. Of course, this is the USS Enterprise C model, but there was at least one ambassador there, the USS Yamaguchi, and there might have been more because this was still quite a common ship in 2366. The Enterprise we know was commissioned in 2332, so the design is quite newer than the Excelsior. It's also quite a bit larger. It's about 525 to 550 meters. We don't know the crew, but we can assume quite a large crew. It is a mix of old and new, with the old mostly being the old style deflector. The nacelles are kind of transitional nacelles. Saucer is kind of patterned like newer, but it has the round. This was kind of classified as another heavy cruiser in the stay, although at the end of Season 1, we see one of these classified as a frigate. Either way, still a capable ship, and still no match. Moving on, we have kind of an interesting variation. This is the Niagara. The USS Princeton was in the battle, and this is a model of the USS Princeton, so it's actually the first one so far I've gone over that is actually from the Wolf 359 specifically. And this is an interesting kit bash. It has a Ambassador engineering hull. It has not two, but three Galaxy-style nacelles and a Galaxy-style saucer. This was a relatively small ship, and it was considered kind of a medium to short range, rapid response, fast transport. Certainly not a dedicated combat ship. And these were commissioned at least by 2349. So a good generation earlier than the Galaxy class, but still. And honestly, one of my favorite kit bashes. I think the 3 nacelle design is neat, but even if it just was 2, I just think it's a solid looking design here. And moving here, we have a bit of a wild card. This is the Excelsior prototype, number 2 in the Eaglemoss collection, the 4 nacelle version. Now these are study models done for Star Trek 3, and there is a 4 nacelle ship, very not well seen in Wolf 359. People have debated which study model it might be. It honestly is probably the other one, but I put the number 2 here because I just like this design a lot better than the first one. Of course, since we don't even know what it was, we don't know anything really about it. But this could easily be a design that came out after the Excelsior, maybe early 24th century. It was background filler. And again, I just think this model is particularly neat. It's very large too. And it goes to show you that there are background ships in Wolf 359 that really aren't discernible, or ships that were filmed for the scene that the footage actually wasn't used. So there's a lot of ambiguity as to what might have been in there. They were basically just throwing in the chicken sink. There we go, the kitchen sink. I'm going to start saying chicken sink, just to fill up the screen. And they knew at the time these are just being watched on standard definition, standard res home television screens. And back in 1989, 1990, 1991, a lot of screens were 19, 21 inches. If anything over 26 was considered big. So yeah, you just kind of rolled with it a little bit, if you know what I mean. I mean, I didn't really give a shit because I couldn't see it anyway, but you know, I was there. I listened to people complain. Yeah, a neat model, and I kind of put it in as a stand-in for all the might have been there, potentially unknown. And sometimes they just put bits and pieces of model kits in the scenes too, to represent wreckage. Well, let's go ahead and move on. I'm going to take a short break. Hey, if you want, pause the video and go grab yourself a soft drink or a beer. Let's start on this end just for a change. This is the USS Firebrand Freedom class. It's actually the only single nacelle ship we've seen on the screen in the old days. At least there were some, Starfleet battles and kind of other tech manual ships we saw with only one nacelle used as scouts and destroyers. And this seems to be in that vein. It actually has a kind of unique phaser cannon on the underside of the Saucer. Has a Galaxy class nacelle, but then a Constitution class gooseneck with torpedo launchers. And then we have a Constitution class ish saucer, or maybe, yeah, I'm going to say Constitution. I was thinking it might have some ambassador elements, but I think what's throwing me off, it's kind of weird. Has some Galaxy and ambassador elements, but it's an interesting thing. I think I always like this one just for how different it was. Seems to be a relatively large ship for what it is. It's a little over 400 meters, give or take. And probably used for scouting type duties. Definitely not a dedicated combat ship, though. And this, of course, is from the specific collection for the Wolf 359, as is this one, the USS Saratoga, the ship that Benjamin Sisko was first officer on. This is a Miranda variant. Specifically, it's a science variant with 2 sensor pods on it. It's gonna happen. This one doesn't like to sit on the stand well. I don't know why. Oh well. It's neat either way. Hope I'm getting something on camera for you guys. Doing what I can. Then you also see why I do this on a soft surface, just in case. One reason I don't think it's so absurd that the Constitution was there is because the Miranda design is just as old. Seems like these were commissioned back in the TOS era, and then they went through a refit. Much the same in the late 23rd century. And if the Excelsior was the backbone, kind of the large heavy cruiser, this was the medium cruiser. We see lots of variants, including the original Reliant. Like I said, this is more of a science. In fact, the captain, I believe, was a Vulcan. We see that it does have weapons, but they've been relocated inside the hull, meaning they probably didn't have as much importance. It's smaller than the Constitution. It's about 240 meters with a crew of 200-ish. But a capable and modular ship, and the Miranda would continue to serve in frontline duties all the way through the Dominion War, even being upgraded. And we saw firsthand in Emissary episode this being destroyed. Sisko and, or I should say, Benjamin and Jake Sisko escaping, and his wife deciding to ditch this universe and go to the mirror universe. But yeah, definitely a ship. And it's for exactly this reason that when they were doing the Battle of Wolf 359, they told how many ships were in it, but they didn't tell exactly which ones because they wanted to leave the story open for future writers, future episodes, which meant they could seamlessly put in a ship like this. And it's very likely other Mirandas were there, but we just don't know about them. Another wee ship, the USS Chekov, named for Pavel Chekov, why not? Although I actually think it was named for Alfred Bester. What do you think? Springfield class was a relatively small ship. I think it was 330, 350 meters. Pretty light crew. It was mostly a transport and cargo ship. It has this big pod on the back that's interchangeable. It was just kind of a routine ship. I think it was classified as a light frigate. I should note that officially the Wants to Fall Over ship here is also considered a light frigate. And by TNG standards, Miranda was considered a light cruiser. Yeah, we see the Chekov on the screen. Then it's just It's another kit bash, and it's not bad, but it's a little uninspired. It's alright. It does its job. It definitely looks different. The deflector hangs down. The hull and stuff is very different on it, but it's one of those ships. But it was relatively small and wasn't particularly powerful. Moving on, we've already seen a 3 nacelle ship. What about a 4? We've seen plenty of 4 nacelles in Star Trek. This is the USS Hawani, the Cheyenne class. And honestly, we really don't know a lot about this one either. It was a little bigger than the Springfield at about 370, 380 meters. We can assume that the 4 engines gave it some benefit. It was probably a good deep space explorer. At least we know that another 4 nacelle ship, the Stargazer, was a deep space explorer. Again, they're just kind of being creative. And in the real world, the nacelles were actually made from markers or erasers. They actually were not repurposed from another kit. And the saucer is actually 2 bottom halves of a Galaxy saucer from a model kit. I found that interesting. So they're very bulgy in the middle and very thin on the edges. And actually the counterpart to that would be this little guy. The Challenger class USS Braun, named after the the Russian space shuttle, and actually, based on the name Challenger, probably also the tragic lost American space shuttle. Kind of an interesting kit bash. It's 2 nacelles, but top and bottom, as opposed to side by side. This back part is actually made from a submarine model kit, and the front part are the other 2 halves from a Galaxy class saucer. Yeah, I find it amusing. It's a relatively small model compared to the rest, but I actually think it's pretty neat. And the nacelles give it a very interesting, very sleek profile. Of course, we don't really know why they were done that way. In reality, it was just to make it look different, but I don't know that there's actually a visible deflector. But a very big engineering hull. And the one in the middle I skipped. The USS Kyushu, the New Orleans class. It was once said that this was essentially a scaled down Galaxy, but in reality it's not. It's its own design. It actually has 3 modules, 2 on top, 1 on bottom. And this is one of the first we've seen that could be considered at least a potentially true combat ship. This was in service since around the 2330s, early 2340s, and was actually one of Starfleet's frontline kind of backbone vessels in the Cardassian Wars, which took place in the 2350s. And in a lot of ways, it was a test bed for the systems that would later be used on the Galaxy class. But in a lot of ways, it's basically like a smaller little Galaxy. Not that much smaller, though. It's considered a heavy frigate. It's around 400 to 430 meters and has a respectable crew of about 500. So it's one of the more modern ships, having a lot of the more modern features like the newer nacelle style and saucer. It's also worth pointing out that O'Brien served on one of these, the USS Rutledge, during the Cardassian War. And hey, it's named after one of our southern cities. And now we're to the front line, as it were. But let's first talk about the Galaxy. Obviously, this model is of the Enterprise D, but it represents the ship that Admiral Hansen had in the battle. We do not know its name. We more or less assume it was a Galaxy class for a couple of context clues. For one, in the graveyard scene, we do see a floating nacelle, presumably from a Galaxy class, although it could be from one of the other kit bashes. But probably more importantly, during communications with Hansen, we see him sitting on a Galaxy class bridge, specifically a battle bridge. So we might assume that they saucer separated to get the civilians out of the way. But why would an admiral leading one of the biggest task forces in recent Federation history also not be using one of the most modern ships? The Galaxy class was first designed in the 2350s, and construction began in 2357. And the Enterprise was the third ship, presumably in its class, first fielded in 2363. So by the time of this battle, they had time to get another couple of these out. You know, interestingly, we could always say it was the Galaxy prototype, USS Galaxy. But yeah, it stands to reason this is probably the largest ship, and it has been said in Star Trek dialogue, once it has saucer separation, the Star Drive is considered a combat ship, although not a custom-made one, I guess. And finally, probably the most famous ship to come out of the entire Wolf 359, the Nebula class. This is the USS Melbourne, which is interesting because this was the one the name was originally assigned to, but then for Emissary they reassigned the name USS Melbourne to an Excelsior class, kind of leaving this a bit of an orphan, even though we actually see this ship not only in Best of Both Worlds, but also Emissary. It just has to be referred to as unnamed. And this was really the prototype for the Nebula, the first time we see it. So it's a little different. The main thing is the Nebulas were known for having these modules on top, and this one's module was two little baby nacelles for some reason. Yeah, it's even kind of more peculiar than the 4 nacelle Cheyenne. To have two full size and then two little babies. But anyway. The USS Bellerophon was one Nebula class that served at Wolf 359. Another was the USS Endeavour, which is presumptively the one ship out of 40 that survived. Reasons, but yeah. So, if anyone survived the battle, it was probably a Nebula class. And probably more Nebulas were there than any other class. This is considered a medium cruiser, alongside the Galaxy being the heavy cruiser of the day. This really was the replacement for the Miranda. It's about 450 meters, had a crew of around 700. It was very configurable. It was made primarily for science, but it had a heavy combat capability, and it was essentially as new as the Galaxy. Debates are kind of on if this came first or the Galaxy. I usually just kind of think they were developed more or less at the same time. If one came out a year or two before the other, it doesn't really matter. We do know that these are still in production after Wolf 359, and that they took a major piece in the Dominion Wars. The later versions we saw would be a little different. Again, this was the prototype, and this was from this model anyway, the Battle of Wolf 359. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of an overview without getting too detailed. Let me talk about what I think about the models and kind of rank them. How about that? Then we'll wrap things up. Alright, I took the non-Wolf 359 ships out. And I debated on it, but I decided to also take the USS Saratoga out. Because for one, it was a retcon, not a bad one. But also, too, it's a Miranda. So I kind of wanted to just do the kit bashes. And I've kind of arranged them in order of weird nacelle. Here is the Freedom. The front view of the... Boy, you just not want to stay on, are you? I think it just bowed out. Sorry about that, guys. Live and unscripted. I'm not even sure what touched it then exactly. I think this one's wanting a little bit of blue tack. Sometimes when they don't want to stay in their stands like that, just put a little dab of blue tack on, just to give it a little gummy stickiness. I think I might have leaned on the table and it tilted down just a tiny bit. Anyway, apologies. Here we go. Next up, the Challenger with its odd asymmetrical. Even the top is higher than the lower. It's different. Next is the Niagara. 3 nacelle. Next we have our 4 nacelle Cheyenne. Next we have our also 4 nacelle, although baby, Nebula. Next we have our Springfield class with its bizarre deflector hanging down. And finally we have our Narlands class. And there you can see the pod below. Look at this guy. My face is on the table. So in no particular pre-thought order, ranking these number 7 to number 1. Now first off, I like having them all because they make an awesome little set. But if I had to say which one was my least favorite, I'm actually going to say the Springfield. The model's a good size. But the pod's kind of odd. The hanging down deflector is a little weird. So the model itself I don't mind, but I don't know. I just found like the design's a little hodgepodgey. It just doesn't quite come together for me. It's not bad though. It's nice to have, but definitely flushes out the fleet. Next up, who does it want to be? I guess I'm going to go Freedom, mostly because it's been a pain tonight. The only one that want to fall out of its stand up repeatedly. I'm really glad they did it. I think being a single nacelle is super unique. And I like the Constitution elements. The phaser cannon's neat. But it's a little jarring just how long the nacelle is. I feel like it's just a little disproportionate. So I feel like the execution's a little... This would have been really hilarious if it had those little baby 2 nacelles from the Nebula on the bottom. That would just be adorable. But no, I like it, and I'm really super glad they made it. But it's going to have to be probably number 6. As for number 5, I'm probably going to have to go with the Challenger, which is kind of hard for me because I really like the overall design. But I do find the weird asymmetry of the up and down nacelles, how the lower one doesn't hang down as far. If anything, I would think it'd be the reverse, but you know, have whatever. The model is very much metal. It's probably the most proportionally metal of all of them, but it's also for some reason small. And I think it's just because of how long it is, but it does seem a little dinky as far as a model. But I really still like it, but you know, we're ranking here, so why not? And in kind of a similar vein, I guess number 4 would have to be the Cheyenne. I like 4 nacelle ships, and this one I think is pretty well executed. And it's a big model. And I love like these little kind of small structures on the top and bottom. But the weird kind of how flat shaped the saucer is because of the 2 halves they used is a bit off. And the very, very square nacelles, because of them being basically office supplies, it's just a little bit off. But not by much. It really, not by much. Next, number 3 is the Niagara. I'm a big fan of the Enterprise C. And this is just kind of cool. I'm also a big fan of 3 nacelled ships. Although I think this one would look just as good with the bottom one removed. And then just kind of the 2 top nacelles. But either way, I think it's a neat design. And definitely one, and this was one of the last ones to come out too. It came out, I think, in like issue 120 something. But really like this one. It's a little more plastic than some because of the large star drive. Really the only metal is the saucer. But other than that, really like it. Quite a bit. Number 2. Kind of getting down to it now. I'm going to go with the prototype Nebula. I really like the Nebula design. I'm glad it stuck around. It's nice to see. I'm sorry, wrong one. Where did I stick it? There it is. Sorry, guys. Welcome to my life. But I'm glad it stuck around and got fleshed out, because we didn't want to have a repeat of TOS where it was only one class of ship, and we definitely did need only Mirandas and Obers and Excelsiors. And the fact that they made it modular meant that they could easily have different ships by just swapping out the top, which was really a great idea for the practical model days. I also think, because this was the most recent one, Eaglemoss has done 3 Nebula classes now, and I think while the other 2 are good, this one's the best. I think they really got their art down to making this. The original one had a couple of small issues. This one, they've really hidden the seam lines, and I just think it's a good model. And I like that it's the first on-screen appearance of the Nebula. And also we see this as a model in Deep Space Nine as well. And of course, with that said, maybe a little bit oddly, number 1 is the Narlands. And maybe it is because it looks very conventional. This really does seem like it would be the smaller companion to the Galaxy class. And it's nice that it was kind of the only semi-combat, modern combat ship in the lineup, even though it was a multi-role. Besides, O'Brien served on one, so it's got to be cool, right? This too is quite a large model, and just very well executed. The saucer is on metal, star drive is of course the plastic. And it's just cool to finally have a New Orleans, because for a long time people didn't even really know exactly how these were built. Plus it's named after a Japanese city. I guess these are named after Earth cities. But I like all of these. I really do. And just because it's here, not to leave it out, the Borg Cube. As has been said by many others, it's not great. It's nice to have, but it's all plastic. It does light up, which I guess is something, right? But it was a subscriber gift, so yeah. But if they did a Excel of this and made it all metal and stuff, that would be pretty awesome. I do like having it, because while it's still not to scale, it definitely scales better than the standard issue tactical cube we got, which is the same size as the rest of the ships. So it is nice to have a big Borg Cube looming in the back of the shelf, you know what I mean? So, glad they did it. Wish they had done it a little better, but for a gift, take what you can get, you know? Kind of back to in-universe for one final thought. I'll just say that if you notice, pretty much the whole fleet was thrown together at the last minute, which is not surprising, but these were not combat ships. These were exploration or convoy or transport, or at most like border defense ships. Starfleet had become terribly complacent. The Romulans had been gone for a long time until recently. The Klingons were allies. The Cardassians weren't really a fundamental threat. And so they had kind of let their starship designs lax. And I think that's why so many older designs like the Miranda, Oberth, and Excelsior had been leaned upon so heavily during the Next Generation era. But after Wolf 359, they'd introduce a whole new generation of ships, and they would be more and more geared to warfare. And with that, I think I'll let it go, guys. Appreciate you hanging out with me. If you'd like to see more details of these ships, each of them does have their own independent video. That's why I didn't go too heavily into detail. I just thought since I did the Battle of Wolf 359 about 14 months ago when I was starting this channel, that I would, go ahead and try to do it again. I'm sure it's not awesome, but hopefully I got a little more on camera than I did back then with better lighting. I just do this to have fun, guys. So I hope you had fun too. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.